All right, so welcome to our 2021 Superna Eyeglass webinar. For this webinar, we'll be focusing mostly on the Ransomware Defender and AirGAP solutions. I'll share my screen. My name is Andrew Gonsalves, so I manage the professional service team at Superna. If you have any questions at any point during the webinar, feel free to use the chat function. I can try to answer as I go along. Otherwise, we can have an open Q&A session at the end. Let me just open chat here, so I have it open on my screen. So we'll begin with a topic that's at the top of the list. For many Isilon administrators, how do you protect Isilon data from ransomware attacks? So how do we stop a ransomware attack using the Ransomware Defender product? The primary defense is to stop the ransomware at the source, and the secondary defense is having an isolated and air-gapped copy of the data at another site that you can be used as a last resort for backup or recovery purposes. The Ransomware Defender product can be summarized in two parts, and part one of the Ransomware Defender features detection. So ransomware attacks are detected by monitoring real-time data access information, so using the audit log on the Isilon, and analyzing user behavior to detect patterns consistent with a ransomware attack. The feature will also detect the presence or emergence of over 2,500 known ransomware file name extensions. Part two of the Ransomware Defender feature is limiting damage. So Ransomware Defender is able to automatically block access to the individual user that triggered the event. Preventing the further spread of ransomware will help reduce the recovery time and the cost. The feature will also automatically create read-only snapshots on the Isilon as a recovery source. So you likely already have existing snapshot IQ schedules, but an additional snapshot at the time of infection detection allows for a simpler ground zero type of recovery option. And because Ransomware Defender is a learning system that can also learn from behaviors that are unique to each environment. So next, I'll just go through the UI for the Ransomware Defender in here. Again, for anybody who's joined a bit later, if you have any questions as I go along, just feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as we progress here. So the Ransomware Defender UI looks like this. As soon as you open it, you're presented with any active events that might exist on the cluster in that moment. This was an event that I triggered a bit earlier this morning, but just to kind of show some entry here in the list. So in terms of active events, we can see the different columns that are shown. The current state, so this one is just monitoring, it didn't take any action. The severity, so whether or not it has been upgraded to the point that will lock the user out, or if it's just a general warning or an alert. You can also get an opportunity to see which files were impacted, so which ones we deem to be a bit suspicious. So you can see here, it's within an HR folder, and there's a bunch of files with a known extension that we know is .locky. So you can also pull these out into a CSV. So if you wanted to have a good list of which files were actually impacted, easier to look that way. The user account that triggered this, so in my case, root, but typically you would see usually some sort of AD user account there. What time that was detected at. If any shares were locked out, it'll list the share name in here. If there's any snapshots that were created, it'll also list the name of the snapshot here. When this event expires, the client IP address, which is important to know, and then any actions you can take from here. There's also a bit of a log here that tells you everything that occurred in the order that it occurred in. But it gives you the opportunity down here to just acknowledge the event. You can also comment, so just write a general comment saying, you know, this wasn't, or this was just a test or something like that. You have the opportunity to create a snapshot, so trigger a snapshot on the Isilon to get created. You can also choose to archive it as false positive. So if you think that this is something that happens frequently, or this type of event, something that happens frequently, and it is a false positive, you can allow the system to learn about it by archiving it as false positive. You can choose to also lock the user out if it hasn't reached that point just yet, but you want to give yourself some time to investigate. You can lock it out through here. And a lockout is just going to all of the SMB shares that this particular user has access to, and putting a deny permission on that share for that user account. And then you can also archive it as unsolved. And basically that just removes it from the active events. So you can see that this one was detected at 6:46. There's an expire of another 37 minutes, so about an hour or so. But by all means, if it gets to the point where more files are starting to get encrypted or have that new extension put in, then that will escalate it to a lockout. Down here, there's the event history. So any past events, unresolved or recovered, are listed in here. Here's the false positive section. So if you did start to set up or deem some events to be false positive, they'll show up in here, and you have the opportunity to remove them. Here is where you build a bit of a whitelist if you need it. So you can ignore specific paths on the Isilon so that we don't monitor them for ransomware behavior. You can ignore specific users, or you can ignore specific client IP addresses. So, a good way, if you have an application that does something that's very repetitive that may look like ransomware, then you have a couple of options. You can either flag it as a false positive, or you can choose to ignore that specific path, or you can ignore if there's a user account that it uses for that application, or you can ignore specifically the IP address for that application. Next down here is just threshold. So these are settings to make the product more or less tolerable depending on what your requirements are with the product. So number one, it's straight out of the box, it's always going to generate an alert when it detects an event that would be, or a pattern that would be consistent with some ransomware attack. But if you wanted it to, go to a lockout, to a customer or end user lockout sooner, then you would adjust these thresholds to be, less tolerable. The one thing that, once we deploy this product, we leave it in a monitor only mode, and you can see that option up here. It means it's just going to be monitoring for any events that would look like ransomware. It's going to generate an alert, but it's not going to take any action. So number one, this is the way that we deploy the product in all environments initially, because we want to give it some time to learn about your regular user activity, so that if we have to build a whitelist first before it starts, actually locking users out. So some time is needed in order to ensure that that we have the correct settings in place. And then on the right side, you'll see create snapshot. So this is if it detects a certain event as well, there's an option to just say create a snapshot on the Isilon. Gives you a good place to recover from. So at minimum, we'd say, when you deploy this product, have it on monitor only mode, but also have it creating a snapshot so you have a place to recover to. Eventually, what you would want to get to is turn monitor mode off, turn critical mode on. Critical mode is going to be the point where it starts to lock out users. You would want to do this after you've tweaked the settings a little bit, just to make sure that when it does lock a user out, it's going to be due to some sort of ransomware pattern that was detected. You can allow specific extensions. So like I was saying earlier, in our definitions, we have over 2,000 different known ransomware extensions in this product that it checks for. If there are specific ones that you see from that list of 2,000, maybe you have an application that uses that specific extension, you can allow it in here. And then lastly, from what I'll cover will be this portion right here. It's just called Security Guard. We use this sort of automation for most of our features and products, but what this does is it will simulate a ransomware event. So how do you test that the system is working without downloading ransomware and putting it on your Isilon, you use this feature, the security guard feature. So what this will do on an interval, because you configure it on a specific user account, and then you set up an interval, so mine's set to every 2 hours, it will create, or it'll check for an existence of a share that it creates just for this test within like the system access zone on the Isilon. And then it starts to create files. So you can see here it created some files. And then the files are created with a known bad extension. And then the user gets locked, and then we measure the audit delay. So, how close to real time are we? In my case, 13 seconds. And then once we've locked the user out, then we just restore the user account afterwards. So again, just a quick way to test that the product is working ongoing. You can schedule this to have it running every hour, or you can schedule to having it run once a day, whatever your preference is. But generally something we would always recommend, as long as it's succeeding, then means that the product is doing what it's supposed to do. All right, so that's Ransomware Defender. So that's part one, detection and locking out and things like that. We'll talk a bit about part two, which is more on the recovery aspect of things. So for recovery, we can add layers of protections to simplify the recovery and remediation for your Isilon environments. So of course you have a few options if you are hit with some ransomware attack. Option number one is, traditional backup, like if you have a tape backup, something like that. Option number two is S3 storage, like AWS or Azure or ECS. The time for recovery for this method is important to consider. To recover a third copy from an S3 storage could take weeks to restore, and it's in object format, which means it needs to be converted back to file format with the ACLs, share permissions, and security settings that need to be reapplied. So there are other solutions that we think are better, which is this one that I'm showing here on my screen now. This is a feature, it's called AirGAP. We have it available with the Ransomware Defender product. So it comes included with Ransomware Defender. There's no additional license required. And so for many AirGAP solutions, we make copies, but with those solutions, there's no way to ensure that you're not copying data that's been encrypted by ransomware into your vault. So our AirGAP strategy works in conjunction with the Ransomware Defender to automatically suspend the copy operations in the event of any suspicious activity detected on the Isilon. And in order to resume the copy, it requires an administrator to resolve the detection issue first. So a bit more on the high level here. So you have this cluster here on the top left. This is, you can assume a production cluster. And over here on the right is your DR Isilon. So just ongoing replication to this DR. In case of any site failure, you would fail over to the DR Isilon. What the AirGAP solution requires is an additional Isilon at a separate, could be a separate location, or could be a location closer to the production side. And this would be an Isilon that has the bare minimum permissions wise, that or services enabled and things like that, so that it's truly acting as a vault for the data. So in this case, you would have things like SMB services disabled, you would have NFS disabled, you'd have bare minimum networking. And so what we do in this case, once we configure on the production side, is we set up an IP pool, on a specific interface, and it's firewalled to be able to connect to this Isilon to do SyncIQ replication. But at the time when our AirGAP opens up, it creates a static route on that source Isilon to the vault Isilon, and then it's able to send the data across at that point. So it creates the static route, and I'll just summarize it, I guess, into 4 steps. So step 1, it applies a static route to a dedicated IP pool that you have for replication onto this source cluster here. Step number 2, it starts the SyncIQ policy to start the data sync over to this vault Isilon. It monitors the SyncIQ policy for completion. And then once it's completed, the static route is deleted from the dedicated IP pool on the source cluster. So ensuring that the AirGAP is closed at that time. So the goal is to have the Vault Isilon offline as much as possible, ensure the data is well protected. Access to the Vault Isilon is always unavailable, but when the replication is ongoing, then at that point, there's an open connection from the source to the target. And then the other thing that we do with this solution is, because this is an offline Isilon, you would want to retrieve any alarms that exist on that Isilon. You know, but because you don't want to give yourself access to, then Superna Eyeglass is able to pull those automatically when the AirGAP is open. So when the AirGAP is open, we use the API and we just retrieve any active alarms that exist on this Isilon, and we produce them and put them into the Superna UI so that you can review them at that point. I'll do just a quick UI walkthrough of the AirGAP solution. It's fairly straightforward, but I want to show which parts it monitors and some of the job history information that we can see with the product. Okay, so it's a separate icon here, just called AirGAP. And you can see the AirGAP configuration here and whether or not, the state right now shows that the network is disconnected. But there's a couple of jobs. So there's AirGAP number 1, which is transferring, you can see, from the source cluster is called ISIProd, and then the source path is IFS data AirGAP. Typically, this would be, of course, your production data. And then the destination is that the target Vault Isilon, and then it's just transferring into the same path. So you can see the different jobs listed in here, and these are essentially SyncIQ policies on the Isilon, but they're configured a certain way so that the product detects them as part of this AirGAP solution. And then you set the parameters for the job down here. So you can set, this option, like pause data replication when active ransomware events are detected. I think this is what really sets our solution apart from other AirGAP solutions, is the fact that if there are any active ransomware threats, like for example, I had one earlier that I was showing with that .locky files, then the replication will not run for the AirGAP, because we don't want to transfer any data that might have been infected by ransomware into your vault. We really want to keep that as a good copy of the data in case you need to recover to it. So down here we can also see job history, so when the job ran and what it transferred, and you can see the things it does down here. So adds a static route. So we'll say check for active ransomware events, and then add a static route, and then run the policy, and then clean it up after. So this is likely removing the AirGAP and so on. And then here you can also see any reports. So on a daily basis, this will automatically get generated, but shows you how much data was transferred over the past day, how long it took to transfer, and things like that. So you have a quick way to see how much data has been transferred on a daily basis to that Vault Isilon in this report. So I want to go over quickly some of the backup options or the recovery options for this product. As I mentioned, there's a few different ones, three different ones that we'll say. Number one, you can have an access to a subset of the vaulted data. So the data itself on that vaulted Isilon is read-only because it's the target of a SyncIQ policy. But if you needed to have access to just a small amount of data in order to recover for, you can connect the management interface, create an SMB share on that data path on the Vault side. And then, the share is going to be read-only, but you'll have access to the files from there. Option number 2, you can access or recover all of the data. So you can basically just run SyncIQ steps to do a reverse replication of the data from the Vault Isilon back to the production cluster. So we can use SyncIQ speed and performance advantages to restore the data and ACL and TFS permissions to the source cluster. You should typically use that option in the event of having to recover a large percentage of the data. And number 3 is basically using that Vault Isilon as a DR. So this really highlights the advantages of having another Isilon as a vault in the solution. because the scenario turns the vault isilon into the production cluster to serve data directly from the vault without any recovery phase. The way this works is essentially we would be executing a failover to that vault isilon. It allows you to get operational as fast as possible back to operating the business. And let's say if it's just a better option than failing over to your DR. But in terms of recovery options, those are the three. So small amount of data you can just access over the management interface, create an SMB share. You'll have access to the data that way. Option number two, do the reverse sync of a large amount of data from one path on the vault back to the source. And option number three, you could use this third isilon to execute a failover to it or something like that. All right. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I can answer them as we go along. Otherwise, I have maybe one more product that I'll cover, and then we can have an open Q&A session at the end. So with Ransomware Defender, what we're doing is looking at the audit data on the isilon, and we're just processing that audit data in real time. So we're trying to find things that are happening as soon as they happen. With Easy Auditor, which is also using the audit log on the isilon, of course, this product is trying to, it's more for like historical purposes. So you can run, any sort of reports you can think of. You can see the different event types listed in here. So if you want to know who deleted a file or who renamed a file, who moved a folder, things like that, you can run a specific report to get that historical information. We store this like an audit, we store the database, our own database on the isilon itself. And that's what we use to search through these different events. So as the events roll through, we keep the ones we need in our database. So you have a way to do like a historical report. You can choose a time frame. So from the last 7 days, you can pick a specific day, or you can pick a specific time interval. So if you don't know and you want to choose a range, obviously with anything that is to do with reporting, you want to optimize this query by giving it as much information as possible to make sure it finds what you need. You can save the query and then you can run it on a regular schedule if you'd like. So because we put the, we use the audit log and we're able to get real time, just like we are with Ransomware Defender, we built some tools that are active, for active auditing, so real-time auditing, which we think is more benefit than actually having to run reports. Nobody really likes to run reports. So we have these features built into the product as well. So number one, there's data loss prevention, which is just a trigger that you can configure that says, if a certain percentage of the contents of a specific folder start to get copied out from one path into another path, then take an action. And the action could be something like just generate an alert, or you can also check this box up here to create a snapshot. Option number two, if mass delete, but if a certain number of files start to get deleted from a specific folder, then also take an action, alert, snapshot, that sort of thing. So it gives you a way to get notified of the behavior and then to take a snapshot so you can recover. And then we have this one here, which is a custom real-time audit policy. I'll show a bit more info on here because I think this is a nice feature. But this one is really anything you can think of. So you have the options to build your own trigger or policy looking for anything on the isilon, anything that you would deem suspicious, or if you want to look for, like, let's say a specific through a specific directory. So you put in directory equals, but then you can add additional rules. So you can say the extension equals that, or you can say not equal, and so on. So really you can write anything you can think of in here. So any query you can think of, once you save it, it's going to start alerting when that condition is met. So it'll start sending an alert to administrators if that, whatever you've specified here happens. And then you can also have the option to take a snapshot too. So it'll take a snapshot if needed. The other thing is wiretap. This kind of works like Wireshark. So in the same way that, with Wireshark, you can watch the packets move around the network, this is a way to watch the audit log in real time. It's something that you would want to filter on because you'd likely be seeing many events per second. But if you know the username you're looking for or a specific file name or even an event type, then you can watch as it happens in real time on the Isilon. This other option is called Where Did My Folder Go? Fairly popular. It's just looking for any specific drags and drops. So if you're dragging and dropping accidentally dragging and dropping one directory into another, know that happens very often. This gives you a quick and easy way to see where that folder went. So you can search the previous 4 hours, or you can go 6 hours, 24 hours, but this is designed to be very fast and responsive. So you can see, it's going to tell you the columns here. So change time, so when it was moved, it was here, now it's here, and here's the user who initiated that move, which is, just dragging and dropping a directory from one place to another. But knowing where that directory went saves a lot of time because you can go in and move it back whichever way you think is fastest. So you can either drag and drop it back if it's a smaller directory, or issue a move command on the Isilon, whichever one is best. Okay, so I have some questions in the chat. So number one, yeah, I'll be recording. So the session's recorded and I will be sharing it once we're done. Does the Ransomware Defender rely on Easy Auditor for real-time audit log analytics? It relies on auditing being enabled on the Isilon. So not so much on the Easy Auditor. These products can operate independently. So Auditor does not need to be configured in order for you to use Ransomware Defender, and vice versa as well. So with Ransomware Defender, it just behaves slightly differently, but both products just need audit log enabled. Ransomware Defender, what it does is it just sees the events but doesn't store them because it has no need to store them. We need that solution to be real time. With the audit log, it needs to store them in case you want to do a historical search. So if you want to look back in time and see, who ran or who did this like 1 month ago, then you can do that. Of course, it'll store the database on the Isilon, like I said earlier. But what we do is we set retention rules on that database, usually anywhere between 6 months or a year, but whatever the customer requirement is, in order to start, removing or purging that database. But in conjunction with doing the retention, we also back that database up to usually another Isilon cluster. So you can use SyncIQ to just sync that over to another Isilon cluster so that you have a copy of it in time. But to prevent it from growing to be very, very large, then we definitely recommend to set retention settings and then to back it up as well. Okay, so another question. If I didn't answer the question satisfactorily, just feel free to ask again or clarify in the chat. What about golden copy on S3? What are the differences between this and the AirGAP? So golden copy is used, like you mentioned, through S3 storage to copy to things like AWS or Azure, Glacier, or ECS. In that case, hold on. I'm just reading the question. In that case, you're copying to one of those data stores instead. So AirGAP works differently because we're actually what we require is a vaulted Isilon itself. So at another location. So it gives you the advantage of having another Isilon that you could access and fail over to if you needed to, whereas S3 and those products, the files are in object storage, right? So you would have to convert those back. And it could take weeks to restore a copy from an S3 storage because it's an object format, needs to be converted back to file format and ACLs and share permissions and things like that. Does Easy Auditor support auditing HDFS? I'm actually not sure about that. I can double check. We do use the HDFS ourselves for this particular product, but I'll get back to you on that question. you explain how is the file to object copied from Isilon to ECS? Where does Superna stand on the data copy job? I believe this is we use cloud pools for this. So I don't think we use SyncIQ directly, but I'm pretty sure it's just a cloud pools job for the golden copy part of the product. But yeah, here, I'll have to open up a presentation for I wasn't prepared for that golden copy part. Just give me one moment and I can open up some slides for it. Okay, well, give me a moment to come up with some information on the golden copy, but does anybody else have any questions, especially on the ransomware defender or easy auditor parts of the product? So ransomware defender, so the question is how do you size the defender regarding the cluster size? It's just one, so the VMs are actually, this will show it right here, but it's just 3 VMs for one cluster. So one Isilon cluster and 3 VMs for the ransomware defender. These are, I believe, 16 gigs of RAM, 4 vCPU, and probably around 110 gigs of disk each. And that's all it is. So it can scale depending on the amount of audit events you have on the Isilon. So, we can add an additional 3 if we need to, usually 3. And for most of our customers, that's been the required amount. If you provide us with the average event rate that you get from auditing, then we can provide a better amount numbers, but 3 to start, and then it can scale to add additional. If you're using Ransomware Defender and Easy Auditor, then it goes to 6. So we just add 3 more for the Easy Auditor product. The question is 6 the max? You can have more than 6. So you can have 9. I think maybe we have one or two customers that have 9. The rest are around 6. And I think, we have some customers that have 20 or 30,000 events per second. Can you install Superna in any VM? You can. It's just delivered as an OVA format, so you can just download the OVA from our website and run it. And it uses OpenSUSE Linux. We also have Red Hat and CentOS options, but usually the OVA is what we would recommend to use. Okay, no problem. Anybody else? Any questions on these products? We don't have any public, so question if we have any public references. We don't have any that we can share. You can always send an email to sales@superna.net. Here, I think I'll put that up on yeah, there you go. And they can, you can discuss that with them. It really, because of the nature of ransomware, there's not many customers who want to go on record about, having been hit with this ransomware attack. Next question, do you have limitations from Golden Copy to the public cloud versus ECS? Not to my knowledge, although Golden Copy is not my area of expertise. I think they all use the S3 protocol. We generally, say ECS because it's part of the Dell products, but we can certainly also use, AWS or Glacier or Google Cloud Storage or Azure Blob. Okay, so I will say that you can feel free to send an email to sales if you want to know more about the product. If you want to, or any product really, but if you want to know more information about pricing and things like that, most of our products are priced at the cluster level. So if you want a license for Ransomware Defender and you have one production cluster that you want to protect, then it's just one license. Makes it nice and simple. If you want some help with generating some sort of bill of materials, or if you want some more information like particular documentation, or if you have any additional questions on any of those products, fast and easy way, if you just send an email to sales, they're very responsive and they'll give you what you need. Any other questions before we wrap then for today? And guys, for the ones asking about more info for golden copy and things, I took note and I will email you afterwards once I have the answer. Okay. Okay, so I'll get back to you on that, Julien, about the engine for golden copy. All right, so I'll stop the recording here. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Like I said, if you have any more questions, we'll follow up from sales at Superna. I'll send an email to you guys that had some questions about golden copy. Probably schedule maybe a separate session for that.